Hello and welcome back. Hopefully you enjoyed the previous introduction video. So let's move on to video number 2, getting started. The chances are you have already had a go at downloading Blender and seeing what you can do with it. If you have, you will have been greeted by the splash screen and lots of controls around the screen. Blender is a massive program that can very quickly leave you feeling overwhelmed. The workspaces can give you an idea of just how many sub-programs there are within the Blender 3D Creative Suite. Underneath the splash screen is the Layout workspace, followed by Modelling, Sculpting, UV Editing, Texture Paint, Shading, Animation, Rendering, Compositing, Scripting, 2D Animation, 2D Full Canvas, Masking, Motion Tracking, Video Editing. Fortunately, with a little bit of structure and building your skill level from basics up, you don't have to get overwhelmed by the enormity of Blender. You may have noticed my desktop looks a little different to what you're possibly used to. That's because I tend to use Ubuntu Linux as my main operating system. It's the only one I've got on my graphics computer, and I've got Windows on a laptop, so I'll show both loading Blender on Ubuntu and also loading Blender on Windows. So first of all, we need to just open up a web browser, and I'll use Google Chrome to open the web browser as the web browser for this, and you can either type blender.org in the top bar or just search for Blender in the search bar, which I've already done, and that brings up Blender as the top of the search list, and it's just a matter of clicking through to blender.org, which takes you through to the Blender homepage. On the homepage there's a download Blender button that's right in the middle, almost in the middle of the page, ready, because it's the thing that most people go to Blender for. There's also a download link on the top menu to take you to the download page as well. Before I go to that, if you're new to Blender and you've not been to Blender's website at all, it's worth scrolling down just to have a look at the features that are highlighted on the home page, and you can dig a little bit deeper through the menus to get into the manuals and various other things that will help you get started alongside my tutorials. So we'll click on the download link, and in the download page it's already recognised that I'm using Linux, so it's offering me the Linux version of Blender, and that will be 145 megabytes. So if I click on the download button, it takes you to a donate page, and it gives you the opportunity, if you want to make a donation, to support the Blender Foundation, as it's an open source software and relies totally on donations and any funding that they can get from companies that are now using Blender professionally, and so any support you can give, the better. The download appears on Chrome in the bottom left hand corner, so just double click that and it'll open up the archive that contains all of the files that you need to run Blender on your system. And as soon as they've extracted, it's just a matter of extracting them then from the archive, and I put them in Home and under a folder that I've called Programs, and just extract them into that. You can see there's other versions of Blender in there at the moment, and sometimes I'll even load up as far back as 2.49 because there's one or two scripts that haven't been carried through these later versions that I still prefer to use. It extracts the archive and it's ready to use. So if we just shut that down, and I'll open the Home Programs folder, and you can see there's now a Blender 2.91 to point to. So it's been a couple of minor updates to it since its initial release. Click on that and it takes you, and then double click on the loader, and that's as quick as it is. It just opened up in my other monitor. So that's as quick and easy as it is to load Blender. You'll notice on my sidebar I've got a Blender icon permanently on there. I'm not going to go through the process of actually assigning a link on that bar because there's a fair bit of code needed to do that, but it may be one for a future tutorial that will be more about Linux and Blender. But it's easy enough to go into the folder and just double click the loader. I'll just shut that down for a moment and go back to Blender website, because on the download page below the Blender download there's the option to download a different version rather than the one that's been offered to you. So you could, if you was needing to take a version of Blender on a USB drive, so you could load it on somebody else's computer, you can download the right one for their computer. There's Windows, Mac, Linux, and you can load on Linux also through the Snap Store, or you can load on through Steam if you've got Steam on any of your operating systems. But that's as easy as it is to get Blender on your system. I'm not going to go into detail about the program in this tutorial. This was just about getting Blender loaded on your computer. I'll talk about the interface and everything in the next tutorial, but on Linux that's as easy as it is, and we'll move over now to load Blender on a Windows computer. Okay, I'm now in my Windows laptop, so I'll be using Microsoft Edge to do exactly the same as we did in Chrome. Just search for Blender. It comes up with a few options. It's no longer the top of the list because we're in Microsoft Bing. But if you scroll down away from the top ads, you've got blender.org. So click on that to get to blender.org, and again we'll go to the downloads page, and this time it's recognized that we're on Windows, 160 megabytes, and it will download for 160 megabytes. It's the Windows installer, the exe, which is the normal way to put programs into Windows. So click on the download and give it a few minutes. It's a little bit slower because I'm now using Wi-Fi rather than directly with the through Ethernet cabling, but it's still reasonably quick. So it should be with us in a few more seconds, but again we're back on exactly the same Blender page. As soon as the download ends, we can open the file and just go through the login. So we've got the installer up in front of us, so just click next, accept the license, next again. It'll ask you where you want to put it, and we're putting it into the standard ones on my laptop. So next again and install, and it might take a few minutes, so I may cut and come back to this. Okay, it's gone through its setup, so it's just a matter of pressing finish. And everything should be done. So if we now shut down The screen recorder I'm using doesn't record the desktop icons, so in the bar now for Blender, hopefully it'll load the 2.91 version. It's a little bit slower than my other machine, being a laptop. It has to do a lot more for the slower hardware. But there you are, Blender's loaded. Just very simple, following the procedures and the advice from the loader. Okay, I'm back in my desktop now. Hopefully you found that quick run through useful. The next tutorial will look at Blender's interface and what each of the sections do that presented to you when you first load Blender.